Thomas Martinez adjusted his worn baseball cap one more time as he stood at the edge of the military base parking lot. The morning sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, and he could feel his heart pounding against his ribs. After 3 years of staying away, he was finally here to watch his son's promotion ceremony. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. He had driven for 6 hours through the night, stopping only for gas and black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. The radio had played the same songs over and over, but Thomas barely heard them. His mind was focused on one thing: seeing Michael receive his sergeant's stripes. His boy had worked so hard for this moment, and despite everything that had happened between them, Thomas knew he had to be here. The military base looked exactly as he remembered from his own days in service, 25 years ago. Clean, organized, and intimidating to outsiders. Security guards checked identification at the main gate, their crisp uniforms a sharp contrast to Thomas's faded jeans and old work shirt. He had considered wearing something nicer, maybe the one suit he owned, but decided against it. This wasn't about him making an impression. This was about being there for Michael. As Thomas walked toward the ceremony grounds, he kept to the back of the gathering crowd. Families were arriving in clusters, most dressed in their Sunday best. Children ran between the adults, while mothers tried to keep them clean and quiet. Fathers stood with their chests puffed out, clearly proud of their sons and daughters in uniform. Thomas felt out of place among them, like a shadow trying to blend into the sunlight. He found a spot behind a group of folding chairs where he could see the platform but remain mostly hidden. The last thing he wanted was to create a scene or embarrass Michael. Their relationship had been strained ever since the incident 3 years ago. Michael had made it clear that while he didn't hate his father, he wasn't ready to have him be a visible part of his military career. Thomas respected that boundary, even though it cut deep into his heart. The ceremony area was set up with military precision. American flags hung motionless in the still morning air, and a small band was tuning their instruments near the platform. Rows of chairs faced a podium, where various high-ranking officers would soon take their places. Everything looked perfect, just as Michael would have wanted it. Thomas pulled his cap down lower over his eyes and crossed his arms over his chest. Beneath his long-sleeved shirt, he could feel the raised skin of his tattoos. Most people couldn't see them when he was fully dressed, which was exactly how he preferred it these days. The tattoos were remnants of a different life, a darker time that he had worked hard to leave behind. They told stories he wished he could erase, stories that had cost him his relationship with his son. The crowd continued to grow around him. He overheard conversations about promotions, deployments, and family pride. A woman near him was telling her friend about how her daughter had called every week during basic training, and how proud she was to see her graduate. Thomas felt a pang of jealousy. Michael rarely called, and when he did, their conversations were brief and formal. At exactly 9 o'clock, the ceremony began. The military band struck up a march, and uniformed soldiers began filing onto the platform. Thomas scanned their faces, looking for Michael among the dozens of young men and women. When he finally spotted his son, his breath caught in his throat. Michael looked so much older, so much more mature than when Thomas had last seen him. The uniform fit him perfectly, and he carried himself with the confidence of a true soldier. General Patricia Hawkins took the podium, her silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. She was a decorated officer with over 30 years of service, known for her no-nonsense approach and keen eye for detail. As she began speaking about honor, duty, and the sacrifices of military service, Thomas found himself hanging on every word. This was the world his son had chosen. A world that valued discipline, respect, and clean records. The general called names one by one, each soldier stepping forward to receive their new rank insignia. Thomas watched with growing excitement as the list moved closer to Michael's name. He could see his son standing at attention, probably nervous but hiding it well. That was Michael's way. Always composed, always in control. When Michael's name was finally called, Thomas felt his eyes well up with tears. His son stepped forward with perfect military bearing, saluted crisply, and stood still while General Hawkins pinned the new sergeant's stripes to his uniform. Thomas wanted to cheer, to shout with pride, but he stayed silent and still. This moment belonged to Michael, not to him. After the ceremony, families began moving forward to congratulate their soldiers. Thomas stayed back, watching as Michael was embraced by other relatives who had made the trip. His ex-wife Sarah was there with her new husband, both of them beaming with pride. Michael's younger sister had come too, jumping up and down with excitement as she hugged her big brother. Thomas began to turn away, satisfied that he had witnessed this important moment in his son's life. He had kept his promise to himself to be here, and now it was time to leave quietly, just as he had planned. But as he started walking toward the parking lot, he heard a commotion behind him. General Hawkins was making her way through the crowd, personally congratulating soldiers and their families. She moved with purpose, shaking hands and sharing brief words with each group. Thomas quickened his pace, not wanting to risk any kind of encounter that might complicate things for Michael. But fate had other plans. As Thomas reached for his car keys, a gust of wind caught his baseball cap and sent it tumbling across the parking lot. Without thinking, he ran after it, his long sleeves pulling up as he reached and stretched to catch the cap before it rolled under a parked car. He managed to grab the cap and straighten up, only to find General Hawkins standing a few feet away. She had been walking to her own vehicle when she noticed his chase after the runaway hat. Their eyes met for a moment, and Thomas quickly pulled his sleeves back down, but it was too late. The general's expression had changed completely. Her professional smile faded, replaced by a look of intense scrutiny. She had seen something on his exposed forearms, something that had caught her attention in a way that made Thomas's stomach drop. He knew that look. It was the same look he had seen on Michael's face 3 years ago when the truth about his past had finally come to light. General Hawkins took a step closer, her eyes never leaving Thomas's face. The parking lot suddenly felt very small, and Thomas realized that his quiet visit to watch his son's promotion was about to become something much more complicated. The careful distance he had maintained from Michael's military career was about to be shattered by a moment of bad luck and an observant general who had clearly seen more than he had intended to reveal. General Hawkins stood perfectly still, her experienced eyes studying Thomas with the intensity of someone who had seen countless battles and remembered every face that mattered. The silence between them stretched like a taut wire, filled with unspoken recognition and questions that hung heavy in the morning air. "Excuse me," the general said, her voice carrying the authority of decades in command. "Could I have a word with you?" Thomas felt his mouth go dry. He glanced toward the ceremony area where Michael was still celebrating with family members, completely unaware of what was happening in the parking lot. The last thing Thomas wanted was to create a situation that would embarrass his son or jeopardize his career. He had come here to be supportive from a distance, not to become the center of attention. "Ma'am, I was just leaving," Thomas said quietly, fumbling with his car keys. "I don't want to cause any trouble." But General Hawkins stepped closer, and Thomas could see that she wasn't going to let him simply walk away. Her gaze moved to his forearms, where the sleeves of his shirt had settled back into place, concealing the tattoos that had caught her attention. There was something in her expression that wasn't quite suspicion, but wasn't friendly curiosity either. "Those markings on your arm," she said directly, cutting through any pretense of small talk. "I've seen them before. Ranger Battalion insignia, if I'm not mistaken. 3rd Battalion, 75th Regiment." Thomas's heart nearly stopped. Of all the things he had expected this day to bring, being recognized by a general was not one of them. He looked at her more carefully now, noting the ribbons on her dress uniform, the insignia that marked her as someone who had seen real combat, real leadership positions. This wasn't just any general. This was someone who knew the military inside and out. "I think you have me confused with someone else, ma'am," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. The truth was written all over his face, in the way he stood, in the way he instinctively came to a more respectful posture when addressing her. General Hawkins smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. It was the smile of someone who had caught someone in a lie and was deciding what to do about it. "Son, I've been in this military for 32 years. I know a ranger tattoo when I see one, even if it's only for a split second. The question is, What's a former special operations soldier doing hiding in the back of a promotion ceremony? The weight of the moment pressed down on Thomas like a physical force. He could feel sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Everything he had worked to avoid for the past 3 years was happening right now, in this parking lot, while his son celebrated the biggest achievement of his military career just 100 yards away. "My son," Thomas said finally, the words coming out as barely more than a whisper. "Sergeant Michael Martinez. I came to watch him get promoted." The general's expression shifted slightly, surprise flickering across her features. She glanced back toward the ceremony area, then back at Thomas, processing this new information. "Martinez is your son? But he never mentioned having a father in the service." Thomas felt the familiar stab of pain that came whenever he was reminded of how thoroughly he had been erased from Michael's military story. His son had worked so hard to build his own reputation, to be seen as his own man, that he had essentially disowned his father's service record. Not that Thomas blamed him for it. "He has his reasons for keeping that quiet," Thomas said, looking down at his worn boots. "Our relationship has been complicated since he found out about my discharge." General Hawkins studied him with renewed interest. As a high-ranking officer, she had access to personnel records, discharge papers, and the kind of information that most people never saw. She could probably find out everything she wanted to know about Thomas Martinez with a few phone calls. But right now, in this parking lot, she was operating on instinct and observation. "What kind of discharge?" she asked, though her tone suggested she might already suspect the answer. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of new sergeants taking photos with their families. These were good kids. Clean kids. The kind of soldiers the military could be proud of. The kind of soldier Michael was. Not like him. "Other than honorable," Thomas said finally. "Conduct unbecoming. I made some choices. Got involved with some people I shouldn't have. Brought shame on the unit, on the uniform, on everything I had sworn to protect." The general nodded slowly, pieces of a puzzle falling into place in her mind. She had seen this story before. Too many times. Good soldiers who made bad decisions, who got mixed up with the wrong crowd or made choices under stress that they would regret for the rest of their lives. The military was strict about such things, as it had to be. Standards were standards. And when someone broke them, there were consequences that lasted long after the paperwork was filed. "And your son found out about this 3 years ago?" she asked. "Right before he enlisted," Thomas confirmed. "He was so proud to follow in my footsteps, always talking about how his dad was a war hero. Then he did some digging, found out the truth about why I really left the service, found out that everything he thought he knew about me was built on lies I had told him to protect him." General Hawkins could see the pain in Thomas's face, the weight of years of regret and lost relationship. She had been in command long enough to understand the ripple effects of military discipline. How a single bad decision could destroy not just a career, but an entire family structure. "So you've been staying away from his military career," she said, more as a statement than a question. "He asked me to," Thomas replied. "He said he needed to build his own reputation, be his own man. He didn't want anyone to look at him and think about his father's mistakes. I respected that. This is the first time I've set foot on a base since his basic training graduation, and I stayed in the back then too." The general looked back toward the ceremony area again, where the celebrations were beginning to wind down. Family members were taking final photos, and soldiers were beginning to move toward a reception area that had been set up nearby. Soon, people would start heading to the parking lot, and this private conversation would become very public, very quickly. "But you came today," she observed. "Why today?" Thomas followed her gaze toward Michael, who was laughing at something his sister had said while his mother adjusted his new sergeant's stripes. "Because it's important. Because regardless of what happened between us, he's still my son. And this is one of the biggest days of his life. I couldn't miss it, even if I had to watch from the shadows." There was something in Thomas's voice that resonated with General Hawkins. She had seen plenty of parents over the years, some supportive, some absent, some who caused more problems than they solved. But there was something different about this man, something that spoke to genuine love, and genuine regret, rather than selfish motivations. "The 3rd Battalion, 75th Rangers," she said thoughtfully. "That was some serious business back in the day. Those tattoos you're hiding under your sleeves, they're not just unit insignia, are they?" Thomas looked at her sharply, surprised by her perceptiveness. Most people who caught a glimpse of his tattoos only saw the obvious military markings, but General Hawkins was clearly seeing something more. Something that indicated she had more knowledge about special operations than the average officer. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "They're not." She nodded, and Thomas could see her making calculations in her head, putting together pieces of information that he hadn't even realized he was giving her. This was a woman who had clearly spent time around special operations personnel, who understood the culture, the bonds, and the types of missions that left permanent marks on both skin and soul. "Well, Mr. Martinez," she said finally, "it seems we have ourselves a situation. Your son is one of my finest new sergeants, and you're a former operator trying to stay invisible. The question is, what do we do about it?" Thomas felt his stomach clench. The way she phrased the question made it sound like she had plans, like this encounter was going to lead somewhere he wasn't prepared to go. All he had wanted was to see Michael get his stripes and then disappear back into the anonymity he had worked so hard to maintain. But looking at General Hawkins, Thomas realized that his careful planning might have been pointless. This was a woman who didn't let things go easily, and she had clearly seen something in those brief seconds when his tattoos were visible that had triggered more than casual interest. Whatever happened next, Thomas had a feeling that his days of staying in the shadows of Michael's military career might be coming to an end. General Hawkins reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her smartphone. Without saying a word, she scrolled through what appeared to be a contacts list, her fingers moving with purpose. Thomas watched nervously, wondering if she was about to call military police or perhaps contact someone about his presence on the base. "I need to make a call," she said. But instead of stepping away for privacy, she held the phone so Thomas could see the screen. The contact name read, Colonel James Reed. Rhett. Thomas's blood turned to ice. He recognized that name, even though he hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over 15 years. Colonel Reed had been his commanding officer during some of the most classified missions of his career. Operations that were still buried so deep in military files that most people would never know they had happened. "You know that name?" General Hawkins observed, watching the color drain from Thomas's face. "Ma'am, I really think there's been some misunderstanding," Thomas said, but his voice was shaking now. "I should go. My son doesn't even know I'm here, and I don't want to complicate his day." But General Hawkins was already pressing the call button. She held up one finger, indicating for Thomas to wait, while the phone rang on speaker. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered, "Patricia? What's got you calling on a Saturday morning?" "Jim, I need you to confirm something for me. I'm standing here with a man named Thomas Martinez, former 3rd Battalion, 75th Rangers, says he was discharged other than honorable about 12 years ago." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Thomas could hear papers shuffling, and what sounded like a chair creaking. "What does he look like?" Colonel Reed's voice had changed, becoming more serious. General Hawkins described Thomas briefly, mentioning his approximate age, build, and the fact that he had visible tattoos that appeared to be military-related. As she spoke, Thomas felt like he was watching his carefully constructed new life crumble around him. "Patricia," Colonel Reed said finally, "you need to be very careful about what you say and where you say it. If this is the Thomas Martinez I think it is, his discharge paperwork doesn't tell the whole story." "What do you mean?" General Hawkins asked, though Thomas could see in her expression that she had suspected something like this. "I mean that sometimes the military has to make choices between protecting national security and protecting individual soldiers. Sometimes a man has to accept a bad discharge to keep certain operations classified. Sometimes a soldier sacrifices his own reputation to protect information that could get other people killed." The words hit Thomas like physical blows. For 12 years, he had carried the weight of that dishonor, had let his own son believe that his father was a failure and a disgrace. He had accepted the shame and isolation because it was what he had been asked to do. what the mission required, but hearing it spoken aloud, especially in front of a general, felt surreal. General Hawkins looked at Thomas with new understanding. Are you telling me that his discharge was a cover story? I'm telling you that there are some stories that can't be told. Even now, Colonel Reed replied. But Patricia, if this is Tom Martinez, then you're looking at one of the finest soldiers I ever had the honor to command. His tattoos aren't just unit markings. They're commendations for operations that officially never happened. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling the weight of years of secret burden. He had been on missions that involved rescuing hostages in countries where the United States officially had no military presence. He had gathered intelligence that prevented terrorist attacks, had eliminated threats that the public would never know about. And when one of those missions had been compromised by a leak in another department, he had agreed to take a dishonorable discharge to maintain the fiction that the operation had never occurred. The tattoo on his left forearm, Colonel Reed continued, if it's who I think it is, shows a specific insignia for Operation Desert Shield. But Tom Martinez was never officially part of Desert Shield, because officially, his team was never in that desert at all. General Hawkins stared at Thomas, understanding dawning in her eyes. You've been carrying this alone for 12 years? Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. My son thinks I'm a disgrace to the uniform. His mother thinks I was kicked out for drugs or theft or cowardice. I've let everyone believe that because the alternative was breaking classified agreements that could still get people killed. Tom? Colonel Reed's voice came through the phone speaker. Is that really you? Yes, sir, Thomas managed to say. Son of a gun. How are you holding up? The concern in his former commanding officer's voice nearly broke Thomas's composure. For 12 years, no one in the military had spoken to him with respect or recognition. He had been a ghost, a non-person whose service had been erased from official records. I'm managing, sir, Thomas said. I work construction now. Keep my head down, stay out of trouble. And your boy? Patricia mentioned a son. Thomas looked toward the reception area, where Michael was still celebrating with his family. He just made sergeant. He's a good soldier, sir. Better than I ever was. I doubt that, Colonel Reed said firmly. But Tom, does he know about what really happened? No, sir. He thinks I was discharged for conduct unbecoming. He asked me to stay away from his military career so my reputation wouldn't hurt his advancement. General Hawkins had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. As a senior officer, she understood the delicate balance between operational security and personal sacrifice. She had heard rumors of soldiers who had taken official blame for classified failures, but she had never met one face to face. Patricia, Colonel Reed said, I'm going to send you some documents. They've been declassified as of last year, but they haven't been widely distributed. Tom's real service record. It might help you understand what you're dealing with. Within minutes, General Hawkins's phone was chiming with encrypted messages. She scrolled through documents that painted a completely different picture of Thomas Martinez's military career. Commendations for valor. Recommendations for promotion. Mission reports that described acts of heroism in places that the public believed were peaceful. My God, she said quietly, looking up at Thomas. You have a silver star. 3 bronze stars. A purple heart. Officially, no ma'am, Thomas said. Officially, I was never in the places where I would have earned those decorations. But you were there. You did these things. Thomas nodded. We all did. My team. We went places and did things so that other soldiers wouldn't have to, so that certain problems would just disappear without anyone having to explain how or why. General Hawkins looked back toward the reception area, where Michael was starting to move in their direction with his family. Your son is coming this way. Thomas felt panic rising in his chest. Ma'am, please. Whatever you're thinking, don't. He's built his own career, his own reputation. He doesn't need his father's baggage affecting his future. Tom, Colonel Reed's voice came through the speaker again. You've carried this burden long enough. That boy deserves to know what kind of man his father really is. With respect, sir, he's better off not knowing. The official story keeps him safe, keeps his career clean, but General Hawkins was already making a decision that would change everything. As Michael approached with his family, she stepped forward with the bearing of someone about to make an announcement that mattered. "Sergeant Martinez," she called out, causing Michael and his family to stop and come to attention. "Could I have a word with you? There's someone here I'd like you to meet properly." Thomas wanted to disappear, wanted to sink into the asphalt of the parking lot. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. After 12 years of shadows and silence, his secret was about to be revealed by a general who believed his son deserved to know the truth. Michael looked confused as he approached, clearly wondering why a general wanted to introduce him to the middle-aged man in civilian clothes who had been lurking around the edges of the ceremony. But as he got closer, recognition began to dawn in his eyes. "Dad," Michael said, his voice filled with confusion and something that might have been anger. "What are you doing here?" Before Thomas could answer, General Hawkins stepped between them. "Sergeant Martinez, your father and I have been having a very interesting conversation. It turns out there are some things about his military service that you might not be aware of." And with those words, Thomas knew that his carefully guarded secret was about to become something much bigger. Something that would change not just his relationship with Michael, but possibly his entire future. The quiet man who had come to watch his son's promotion was about to discover that sometimes the truth has a way of finding the light, even after years of darkness.